What if there was a way that you could map business impact? And by that, I mean real world results, bottom line results, to learning, to your investment in learning, to the investment in training and developing your talent, using numbers, using quantitative analytics. Wouldn't that be great? Well, spoiler alert for you. I just caught up with two thought leaders on this topic, James Meadows and Brandon Brodkin. They're awesome, by the way. But I had a great conversation. It was a far-ranging conversation. We did everything from making dirty dancing analogies to data cakes. Brandon James really made this idea of data sound delicious. And I can't wait for you to listen to this one. You're going to have a lot of fun with it. Stand by and enjoy. Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Welcome to the Performance Matters podcast from GP Strategies, your workforce transformation partner. In each episode, we'll interview industry experts and explore best practices and innovative insights to help your organization improve performance. Hello and welcome to the Performance Matters podcast, sponsored by GP Strategies, the world's leading talent transformation organization. I'm your host, Michael Thiel, and as always, it's an honor and a privilege to share some time with you. Today, we're talking about mapping business impact to learning with analytics. And to use a Dirty Dancing homage, by the way, that's a movie from the 80s if you haven't heard of it. We're talking about taking baby... learning out of the HR and compliance corner and letting it soar in the arms of analytics. Yes, my friends, we're ready to have the time of our lives. Our dance partners today on the podcast are James Meadows and Brandon Brodkin, two professionals who come to this discussion with valuable perspectives on this topic. Gentlemen, welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Detect a little bit of a British accent here, James. Is that correct?
Definitely British through and through.
Very cool. And Brandon, how are you today, sir?
Swell, especially after that intro, Michael.
I'd like you to put yourselves into context for our global audience. And since James has the UK accent, I'm going to let him go first here. So James, tell us a little bit about you, what you do, where you live, that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I am the director in our sales division. Specifically, I suppose I hold the client service lead role for a couple of our largest clients, which in general means that I spend a lot of time working with those clients, trying to figure out how do we push the boundaries forward of what they do in learning, how they do it, where they're going next. And analytics is totally top of their agenda at the moment. So lots of conversations going on in that space. As you say, I'm British. I reside just outside of London, in a small town called Guildford, which is great. Best of both worlds. You got London at your fingertips, and the outside in the green world, sort of outside of London, which is fantastic.
Very cool. You've got an unfair advantage on this podcast too with that cool British voice. So, Brandon and I are going to have to work hard to keep up with you. So welcome though. We appreciate you being here, James.
No worries.
Yes. Okay, Brandon, tell us about you. Put Brandon Brodkin into context for us.
Brilliant. So, and brilliant, I picked up from my British.
Brilliant.
So I use it, overuse it. So my name is Brandon Brodkin. I'm a director of sales and partnerships here at Watershed. So Watershed is the world's first learning analytics platform. And I am not in the UK. I am just south of Nashville in Tennessee. So the other accent you might hear is an occasional y'all or something like that coming from the South. So excited to speak with you all today. I've worked a few times with James and meeting Michael for the first time, and it's really exciting.
Very cool. Well, we're excited to have you, and we like to have some fun here on the Performance Matters podcast. So before we get into the serious meat, I like to challenge all of my fellow dance partners and just have them share one fun or surprising fact about themselves with our global listening audience. So James, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here first over there. I know because you're already in your afternoon here. What's one fun or surprising fact about James Meadows?
I I love this. I had to rack my brains. It's like, what's fun and surprising? I'm like, oh God, no! I've got to think of something fun. Um, so actually, I actually went out and asked a couple of people. I was like, what have I done that's fun? But I think one of the best things that one of my friends came back with was so during lockdown in the UK, and yeah, we're all aware of the fun we've had over the last couple of years. But I started making furniture, so I got really bored that first summer, and I went, we need a table for the conservatory. I'm going to make it. So yeah, during lockdown, I taught myself. Well, what is it called? Furniture carpentry, and
Whoa.
started making furniture. So my current dining table is a homemade creation.
That's pretty baller. That's pretty sweet. And, we are on video chat for the purposes of this recording. And I'm going to say one thing that I don't think you made that I think I have too is in your top of your bookshelf is a IKEA, one of those little squares that pop up. I have like 4 of those in my bedroom. So I saw that. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. You didn't stitch that one together, did you?
I didn't stitch that one together. I have a little girl. So I have no end of those boxes filled with crafting stuff.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? Okay. Brandon in Nashville, y'all. Okay. What's one fun or surprising fact about Brandon Brodkin?
This was another thing, like James said, that I had to rack my brain on to sound as interesting as possible. And I think what I landed on is that by day I'm a sales director and work with global customers, and then by night in the evenings I coach soccer. So I coach one of the private schools, American soccer, British football. James, just for you.
James is over there kind of cringing, like, oh, soccer, man.
But I have to. I'm not dividing anyone. We're uniting under the So I coach a private school, their high school team, and that's my fun fact. That's what I got for you today.
Oh, that's a great one. Very cool stuff. Well, I think we're gonna have a good time here today, and we're shifting gears here. We're doing a little 2-step combo, and we're gonna start talking about really the main topic, which is how do we map business impact to learning with analytics. And, I want to ask a stupid questions. I've got to do this. I've got to be the one here that looks like the stooge, but I just want to ask you 2 brilliant gentlemen that are in this world of learning analytics to just define this term analytics first before we get into the learning part. So who wants to take this 5th grade type question for me so everyone is very comfortable with the topic?
I'll start, right? So if we were to go definition, Webster definition, it's going to be something around.
Pull out the big Webster's thing there.
Blow the dust off it. It's going to be something around systematic computational analysis of data relevant to a problem or what have you, right? But the way I see it in my monkey mind is just leveraging data that we have collected and analyzing that, right? So we're going to use analyze and analytics in the same definition of the word to drive certain outcomes or insights, right? So we have data, and now we're putting some type of rigor over it, right? And bringing that data together, and then being able to drive insights with it on the other side.
So what I'm hearing is it's making sense of things using numbers and math and things like that, right? To make informed decisions.
Making sense.
Is that okay? I'm trying to really get it down here because I'm a creative director type person where I think visually, and you can tell from my Dirty Dancing analogies. There's a lot of horsepower under the hood on that side. Okay, so let's talk about our world here, and that's learning. I know with analytics, I'm a big golf guy, and they're always doing things like strokes gained, and this guy is putting and he's gaining 1.3 putts over the crowd and everything like that. But let's talk about learning here. So why would a company need to leverage learning analytics? So that's a question. I'm going to put this one over here to James first, because you are actively diving into this world of financial services with various global clients. So what's your take on this? Why is this so important?
I think the biggest thing for clients is that they spend a huge amount of money on learning. It's we talk about sort of it being one of the areas where companies spend externally millions of pounds per year to train their staff. Previously that's largely been done by gut feel. I think we need to train the team in X, or I think we need this capability. And that hasn't ever led to us being able to go, right, we've spent this money on this learning. Did it actually do what we wanted it to do? But also in the background, we've now got learning management systems. We've got LXPs. We've got more data than you can shake a stick at. So actually, analytics now becomes really critical in learning, because for the first time ever, we've got the data. We've got data coming through HR systems. We've got data coming out of, company systems, whether it's, sort of metrics around quality, whether it's metrics around, sort of the employee satisfaction and, and learning, that we can then start to take insights through to, are we making a difference? Is that learning product making a difference? Are we spending our money in the right place? And I think that's why analytics has become so critical in learning, because as we've moved through the last few years, we've got so much data that actually now it's about really driving the insights from it, really starting to get into that wonderful world of, can we prove that return on investment?
That sounds like a unicorn to me, because I've been in this whole learning world, at least in the automotive sector, since '98, and traditionally everyone's justifiably so, and you got $1 million of investments, so like, how are we doing? And we'll be like, well, the crowd really liked the food. They were very happy with the trainer, right? They thought the trainer was really nice. But when you get into those, to use the nerd terms, those Kirkpatrick measurements of levels 3 and 4 of, did you actually make a business improvement? And we've always been like, well, it's kind of difficult to do that. It's hard to measure that. And it sounds like what you're telling me now is there's a lot of data coming in, so there's a way. You're telling me there's a chance, is what we're saying here, right?
I think that's the best way of putting it. There's a chance we can start to now take business metrics, business outcomes, and map those through the design cycles of learning, and therefore measure the outcomes of it.
Okay.
And that's where you really get to, because if you've designed it around a business outcome, you've implemented it, and you can gather some data at the far side of it. We can start to derive those insights from it. Can we prove return on investment? That probably is a unicorn, but I think we can get a damn sight closer to it than we have in the past.
Now, Brandon, you were saying that the organization you're with, Watershed, actually does this kind of thing. Is that correct?
So let me start here. We'll come back to Watershed in a second. So the reason baby has been in the corner, right, is because typically learning could only bring a very finite amount of data to the conversation, and that was limited by scoring, right? So that's someone took a course, got a score on this date, this time, and what have you, right? So super limited, right? The big four, you can
right, say. Very limited.
So when you bring that, we're only checking boxes. It's compliance, HR, learning fit under HR, but to what James just said, where we're starting to see data across systems, right? That more platforms, more systems. And with that becomes access to more data, especially like he mentioned with measurement of the business outcomes. Now, learning has this plethora of data through a plethora of platforms that we can start, what I like to say, building a data cake, right? And instead of that
sounds delicious, by the way.
It sounds delicious. It is, especially if you properly, I guess we could say. Okay. So Watershed came from a project out of an organization named Rusty Software, who basically co-created SCORM, right?
I was going to say, I mean, I've used Rusty for years as my sandbox.
Yeah,
exactly. To make sure that courses that we're building are actually going to work. So you're saying that company built this learning analytics platform. Is that correct?
Exactly. So
got it.
It started out as a project. The DoD in the US was like, learning is happening elsewhere, and we need the next learning spec to be able to track learning outside of just the LMS, right? So Watershed started out as a project within Rusty, and the project was to create XAPI, and that's a more flexible communication or interoperability. Keep me away from all the geeky terms, because I could get down a rabbit hole.
I was going to say, I'm starting to blink a little bit. I'm like, XAPI. Okay. I don't know what to do with my hands right now. They're coming up.
So
Continue on. Continue on. This is very interesting, though.
it starts out as being able to track learning outside of the LMS, video platforms, reviewing PDFs, and everything like that. So now that content is being hosted outside the LMS, now we need to understand how we can track that data, right? Okay, so now that we identified that, and now we want to be able to how I think the question was, how would a company then leverage learning analytics, right?
Yeah.
So exactly what James said, the first part's always the money. You have this robust ecosystem. By first bringing all this data together into a single system, you're able to have a pulse on your ecosystem. Where's utilization? How can we cut scrap learning? We can get all into all of that later. And then if we fundamentally look at why are people in L&D, they want to make people better, right? To help other individuals. Ultimately, those people within the organization can then be better or more effective at training and learning and developing people within the organization. Let's say the third leg of that stool becomes, how can we then understand if we're moving the needle on the business outcome, right? So why leverage it? And it's for those three main reasons, plus a plethora of others: the money, cost savings, cost optimization, people driving more effective training, and then impacting the business, moving the needle.
All right. So you two are really talking about the important here is it's about ensuring that you're basically putting your poker chips in the right area, making this informed decision. And also importantly, also just saying, okay, let's not put money in this area because we're not getting the ROI, right? It's like if there was a competitor movie to Dirty Dancing and you knew that it wasn't going to be a global phenomenon and it would go straight to VHS tape, then let's not put our money there, right? So Clean Dancing or something like that. So I'll probably cut that one, by the way. But so I don't think I will. You guys are laughing. That means we're going straight to the top. We're going straight to the top. Okay. So let me ask you guys, you gentlemen, excuse me. I don't want to offend my British counterpart here. In terms of making this happen, this all sounds very cool. In terms of how do you do this? I don't even know how to say, how do you get the files in the computer? How do you take all these bits of data and then, put it together to get impact or to isolate impact? What do you call that?
Well, and to that point, GP has this idea of measurement mapping, right? So if we want to have a specific outcome, so this is basically more to the business outcomes or KPIs in learning, they do an exercise of mapping, right? So we want to get higher CSAT scores. What are the variables that play really well or that play towards that CSAT score? It's retention, first time call resolution, and all these variables, and then they float up to create this KPI. And Tim Bryan from GP does a great exercise in kind of leading customers through that. So from the practicality sense of how do we start in mapping this ecosystem, right? So we have all these platforms, and it's first mapping this ecosystem. And every organization has an ecosystem, and then once you put it on a slide deck and draw arrows, it becomes modern, right? So now that you understand you have it, you understand each one of those platforms has data. Well, let's start by aggregating that data together. And that's where an organization like Watershed comes in, because we're going to facilitate that. We're going to automate that flow of data and then be able to paint the single source of truth, that single picture of that data coming together.
Okay. So, it sounds like before we do that, it sounds like what you're saying is, and again, I'm going to be the non-tech person here. It's almost like you're hooking up the data pipes.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Like
Very
you got all these different bits of data. Now, is all that data pure learning, or can you actually tie in things like, revenue and businessy operationy things that have nothing to do with learning?
It can be additional layers of that cake where we say, let's first start the foundational, the learning data. Let's add a layer of HRIS or people in groups data. So now we can segment and zoom in, zoom out of all of that. Add a layer of operational data. So that could be a system like easy and tangible, a CRM. We want to see if sales reps are learning, sales enablement, and then are they ultimately selling or having calls about products?
Okay.
Then you can bring an ERP system in for financial data, and that adds additional layers from there.
Okay. Now, James, you've done this, it sounds like, several times. Like you're in this world. Is this mapping process, is it daunting? What's it like?
That's a grand question. Is it daunting? I think so. I think often when you start out on these journeys, you've got so many pieces of data that you can pull from that you never know where to start. But that's where, and you alluded to it earlier, the mapping. And what we do and what our consulting team do, we sort of look at measurement maps. So what is it that we want to, map? And then you
Okay.
go, so if you're looking at it, it's like where with learning, where do we want to move the needle? So if you think about it, that is, where do we want to move the needle? How are we going to do that? What is it that's going to move that needle? And you go all the way through, and that allows you to sort of start to analyze that data, to look at it, to see where it is. And that's where around learning programs or even entire sort of learning functions, you can start to baseline where they are now, and then look at whatever you're doing and measure that change as you go through it. So you might look at like you say, all of the learning data that's there, and you sort of like map it out, and you sort of go, okay, well, what am I trying to prove or disprove? What am I trying to show? And then once you've got that, it's very clear then to like take the data out of the systems and start to analyze that, start to apply the analytics to it to prove, disprove, whatever hypothesis you're putting forward. So it might be that I want to sort of, we'll train the sales reps in a leading questioning type, so that they should be able to convert more calls to actual sales. Then you're sort of starting going from, well, actually, if we put that in the training, how do we measure that? How do we put that into a measurable item? I.e., are they having the same number of calls? How many of those calls happen with a positive outcome? How many of those positive outcomes actually then convert into a sale? And you can sort of follow it all the way through that map. And then you can start to look at, did those individuals take the training? Have they put that training into practice? Are we starting then to see a difference in behavior of those individuals? And as Brandon said, actually then, can we pull data from the CRM that sort of says that group of sales individuals that have gone through the training are starting to see more sales opportunities convert? And you can see then that you've got that entire map of what you're trying to measure all the way through to outcomes.
Okay, that's starting to make some sense to me, because initially when I think analytics, I start getting a little daunted, but you're starting actually with just very basic questions of what are we trying to achieve with the business? Who's involved? And then it almost like leads you to the data. Is that a fair assessment, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a shared customer that GP and Watershed have that had this really interesting use case to bring it to kind of the practical sense and how that is implemented, where the organization looked at high performance sales individuals. And what they saw was the highest performing sales individuals bundled services. So they weren't just selling one line item, they were selling multiple items, right? And so the training that they then created was this kind of engaged gamification. And it doesn't have to be gamification, but the point is that it becomes targeted in how we train. And then this target focused on being able to bundle services. So asking questions, competing, and being able to understand how services and leading questions can then lead to those bundled services. And they found the impact of that. And there's some great KPIs on it in the use case about created opportunities, win rates, and then size of opportunities. So that downstream impact in really moving the needle by starting with the question.
My sensors are going off in my head here. I can see this holy grail sort of appearing. Is you're saying the learning analytics helped you with a couple things. It sounds like you're saying it helped you first with, hey, what do top performers do? Mm-hmm. It helps you identify that, and then it helps you basically reverse engineer that into what do we need to double or triple down on in terms of learning and development. And then I can also see the third leg going, now we can also measure, now that we've implemented these various learning and development things, we can now measure how that is impacting individuals too. So, I mean, am I tracking here? Am I putting the pieces together?
The puzzle's looking coherent.
Oh, I love it. I think I'm ready to go to the dance floor here at this point. So I can also assume this, I'm going to continue on with the dancing analogy here, is that, as you dance, you get better, you pick up the steps quicker, you get more intuitive, I think. I'm just saying that. I'm going to assume after watching the movie Dirty Dancing. So I'm going to assume the same thing must happen with organizations as they mature in using their data. I'm assuming you can do more cool things with it. So let me ask this to you too. And one of you raise your hand is how can an organization apply this concept of analytics throughout their maturity? And by that, I mean, by maturity, I really mean as they get more mature in leveraging their data, in sourcing their data. So give us some examples.
So yeah, if I go back to some of our sort of like, you know, at the base level, your demand planning is sort of one of the core elements of where you've got a full managed service, yeah, and that is sort of what training are we going to run at what time, at what point in the year, with which individuals, and that requires data from the business units. It requires data from sort of um, you their client services. When are they going to be busy? When can we fit the training in? How much are we spending on it? How much is it utilized? And that, I would say, is at your base level, because that's effectively just taking all of that data and sort of going, all right, how do we structure a curriculum based around this so that we get the best attendance, if you like, at that. And that's where we're at sort of what I would say, not necessarily the immature end, but the basic end of the scale of really using that data. And then you
Okay.
go to the far end, and I've seen this, with other clients, where you're then starting to look at, you know, actually, sort of across that learning, you know, actually which are the pieces that are really truly, moving the needle on them, which are the bits that aren't being used, which are the bits that are, you know, sort of becoming obsolete, if you like. And you start to see across learning the whole product life cycle, the whole product
Mm.
being done, where you effectively, you build a piece of learning, you know what it's doing, you put it on the curriculum, and then you'd sunset it when it starts being used. So you can really start to see how it's being measured. And then down to a project that we did um, in the last year, where we actually redesigned a curriculum based around the company's output, the actual piece that they wanted to change the change what people were experiencing, and therefore change the business metrics, where actually we then went from just on that sort of basic level of you know data and planning, through to actually looking at the business metrics, looking at those individuals, putting them through that sort of onboarding program, looking at their behaviors and their performance at the far side of it, to see the uptick in the
Mm.
output on that. And that was the customer service roles within the client. And so actually, linking that back to then the CSAT scores, or the customer satisfaction scores, that sort of came back. And that's when you're then at that sort of much more mature end of those, of using that data.
That's amazing to think that you can get from that, of like you said, starting with foundational and then getting to a point of, I'm hearing this word in my mind is anticipatory or proactive versus a reactive posture right there. Brandon, have you seen that being realized with tools like Watershed?
It bodes really well for what we refer to as our learning analytics maturity model, right? So what the first category that we have is measurements. That's exactly what James says. That first we have this data that we're able to start working with, right? And that's looking at
Mm-hmm.
high level stuff of what are people doing? What does that mean? And that's when we start to go from measurement to evaluation and starting to work with
Mm.
that data to understand if it's telling us something good or something bad, right? And then you can move to an advanced evaluation. Then inherently, why is that something good or something bad? And that's when the business objectives come in, which is so important that the business is defining, right? Because learning can't define the business objectives. And then 4 is spot on to where James left it, is this predictive and prescriptive model that we can predict that we're onboarding someone in 6 months. And then prescriptive is that we are able to say along that onboarding process that we see there's a knowledge or performance gap, and now we can prescribe content or remediation or coaching to kind of help close that gap.
All right, gentlemen, you are making my head spin here. This is very exciting about the idea of getting predictive, getting strategic. But I'm going to bring us back to earth here for a minute. And that is, let's just start back to the beginning of, like, you know, we've got, let's say we're at an immature organization, and I mean that from a data analytics perspective here. Like, what's the key catalyst to really getting this whole concept working across the organization, and getting learning analytics to work for you? So, James, let me start with you again, because you are actively working with clients. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think the key catalyst, or the key way of making learning analytics work for an organization is knowing what you're trying to measure, knowing what you're trying to do. And like any KPI or organizational result, like once you're into that, the analytics produces a feedback loop. It produces an answer that you can then take action on, and then you go up to the sort of maturity level that sort of says, well, if you've got that feedback loop then feeds back into what are your next steps, what are your next actions, but the more data you have, the more analytics you have, the bigger the feedback loop, or the multiple feedback loops you have, the more you can actually build that into strategy. And then you're starting to get into, well, can I change my learning strategy? Do I know what's happened before, I know what's happening, therefore I can start to predict the future. I mean, very grand statement, predict the future, but you're able to put that into strategy documents and start to think about it. That can be as simple as content strategy. Like, what's the most consumed content? What modality is that content? Or, it could be down to what are the most, the future skills type content that is being consumed the most. Am I looking at being able to develop and adapt my workforce for whatever's coming down in the future? And I think that's really the sort of catalyst to this. If you can turn that data, through analytics into a usable output because of those measurement maps, because you know what you're measuring, because you've been able to apply the analytics in a way, you create those feedback loops, and then we can all use that feedback to change our behavior.
And then Brandon, since you're more on the side of the implementation, and you've seen this across many different clients, what are some examples of feedback loops? Just without naming client names, but give us some examples of some of these different loops that you've seen work.
One that comes to mind, especially where James kind of touched on with the content, we have a large global organization that's focused on their content. Let's just say video content for this matter. And they use our system in the reporting for, let's say, an anomaly detector, right? So if you finish a video, it gets 4 statements. This is all using XAPI. If you don't finish the video or you watch it halfway through, you get less statements, right? So if you do a scatter chart and you see the dispersion of the content objects based on the level of engagement. So on their specific report, in the top right corner is highest engagement, and there's a few there. And then the majority of content's clustered in this bottom left corner, right? And so from there, we can start to extrapolate, all right, well, what are those content objects, right? So what are the characteristics of those items in the top right? Those are 3-minute videos, might be chapterized, and someone can jump in, jump out, and optimize there. Now, so let's use that as kind of core. Now we can add a layer to the cake that is the financial information. That financial information is how much does a specific content object take to create. So let's say some videos might cost $50,000 to put together, and some might cost $5,000 or $500 if we're recording it kind of quickly. So then we can start to overlay not only engagement level, the characteristics, but how much are we costing to do this? Maybe the 50,000 is not being highly engaged with. So we create this feedback loop of, here's the types of content that sees the most engagement, that has this type of characteristics or ingredients that cost this much. So now we have a content optimization, a cost optimization practice, all created from this feedback loop of surfacing that data together.
That's pretty amazing that you could bring up a report and say, listen, potentially these dirty gorilla selfie videos, and again, I'm just theorizing, maybe they work better than the ones where it's like the voiceover and the whatever, the expensive ones or something. Or on the other end, maybe you're saying, listen, we need to justify a higher production value because we're getting a higher take rate on this kind of video, right? So without knowing what it is, the point is the data will lead you to reality.
Exactly.
That's really cool stuff. Okay, guys. So I'm going to also talk about some practical things with you. And what I want to do is just say, okay, what kind of companies are doing this stuff right now? So talk to me about the type of companies, whether, that are involved already at this cutting edge here. So, and I'm talking like size, scope, the complexity of the organization. So James, I'm going to throw this one over to you first. Like what have you seen as the appetite for this?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure I could break it down by the size and scale of a company because I've got both ends of the scale where you've got large multinationals that are really interested in it, have been doing it for years, have been gathering the data and sort of really applying it, and then you've got also large multinationals that are sort of like on their first steps on that journey. So I think the one thing I could probably say is that everybody's on the journey. I think learning analytics has now got to the point where everybody is focusing on it.
So the answer is yes. Like a lot of people are doing this.
A lot
is
of
what
people,
you're saying.
yeah,
right.
A lot of people are doing it, but I think everybody's at a different stage.
Okay, and Brandon, I mean, I know that you are doing this. You're industry agnostic at Watershed here. So what are you seeing in terms of the types of organizations that have had a real appetite and are actively engaging in learning analytics?
I like this question because it shows kind of the plethora of the types of organizations looking at it. And I've seen from a Watershed customer to successfully implementing this, we've seen some with 5,000 employees all the way up to 500,000 plus employees, right? So that that whole gamut or the whole spectrum of size, right? Another variable or trait that I love when I start speaking with prospects is that learning is seen more strategically than it is with the compliance and typical HR learning, but it's seen more operational. So we've seen this move from learning as an org to more of an operational role rather than solely an HR and compliance role, right? And then successful traits, I would say it comes down to data sources, that they have existing platforms that has data relevant instead of tracking everything in an Excel sheet. And then it's, yeah, right. So, and
I was gonna say I've had to do that for several clients where you're putting somebody. Usually it's more of an intern, and you give them like 10 Excel spreadsheets, and you're like, here, go make some magic happen. And you see them about 2 weeks later, and they come up with some very uninformed information. So you're saying not doing that?
I'm saying it's a part of the journey, right? So usually if you have this Excel sheet, maybe you're in the measurement stage, but access to that and bringing it together could be pretty cumbersome.
You're being very kind. You're like, there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe there's an alternative that could automate that for you. And you push a button, it comes up with graphs.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, practically speaking, again, I know everything's not always sunshine and rainbows. Not everyone walks off having the time of their lives in the arms of Patrick Swayze and all that kind of good stuff. So what are some of the obstacles to making this happen, to using learning analytics? So who wants to tackle that one? Because, now we're talking about some of the challenges here.
From our perspective and the type of conversations we have, it's the status quo. The status quo of we've always done it like this and we're going to remain doing it like this because maybe the pain points aren't loud enough yet for us to have to do it a different way. And in order to get to this point of bringing something new in like this, you need to have buy-in, right? And for so long, organizations are used to learning only bringing the big four of characteristics of learning and SCORM type information to the table, right? But when we operationalize it, so I would say, and then of course, data and platforms and data integrity is another big thing, because the whole garbage in, garbage out perspective, if we're putting garbage in, we're not going to get the brilliant insights. So those are my big ones, is remaining the status quo, getting the proper buy-in to know that we're not just building this bridge for where we're at now, but where we want to go from that kind of maturity model that we discussed. Those would be my biggest obstacles to get started.
I think I'd add one to that, which I've seen a lot, which is like certainly in larger organizations, trying to get everybody to use the system.
Yeah.
Or use the different systems, because you'll get sort of like 7 out of 10 business units using the LMS or the LXP, and so you can pull the data down, and then you'll have 3 that use different Excel spreadsheets or use some kind of internally built system, and so you've then got really sort of separate data that but you're trying to pull something across all of those areas. So I'd say one of the biggest things I think is trying to get people to use the systems and use the systems fully.
Another thing I wanted to ask you too about on this idea of obstacles is, and I've kind of had this just with not necessarily with learning analytics, but it's just trying to figure out what people actually need. What are your thoughts?
I suppose it depends. We've had the challenge certainly right at the offset of, when people realize that, being able to implement, learning analytics, requires you to start to look at learning through that sort of business outcome lens. That actually, all of a sudden, they don't necessarily want to put the time in, or they don't necessarily, know the answer to that, or they've got to bring some of the business people in, and they don't have the time. So that can always be a challenge. But I think, once you've got that use case in front of them, once you've got that sort of the idea out there that they can get something really useful from it, you'll often get that time. So the struggle is in positioning it right, I think, more than getting the time or the outcomes from them.
Got it. Brandon, how about you? Is that something that you just consider part of the job that you have to face, is helping people articulate what they truly need?
My favorite tagline, at least for this year, is inspiring curiosity, right? And we might start a conversation with an organization because of X, right? But that specific starting point might not get everyone on board to start the conversation. But when we say, okay, well, here's X, but then have you thought about Y? Have you thought about Z? Have you thought about these items and where we might go? And usually those people that are first hearing about it are like, okay, yes, that's something else we're trying to accomplish. We just haven't gotten it to the top, but now we're able to take out these objects through inspiring curiosity. And so that's exactly what James noted, is that when they hear the vision, when they hear this promised land, that they're able to get buy-in and get on board, devote some time, of course, because everyone else is doing their own jobs, but we can kind of get them on the ship, right?
So, gentlemen, you've been so very generous with your time here. So I wanted to ask you both one final thought about this topic of mapping business impact to learning with analytics here. So one final thought, if there's one last bit of advice or a comment that you want to put a bow on this topic, I'm going to start with you, James, here, since you've got your lovely, I assume that's a golden retriever in the room there with you.
It's a red fox Labrador.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Lovely dog, though.
Rusty,
and you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job speaking so intelligently with us while your dog's just showering you with love.
Yeah.
But what's one final thought? Like, what's something that you'd like to say to the audience about this whole topic of learning analytics?
I think I'd probably say, embrace it. Like learning needs to embrace analytics. It needs to embrace data. It's not comfortable with it because learning, I think, has always seen themselves as quite sort of fluffy and there for the people and trying to sort of develop them. And analytics and data are quite hard edged. It makes you make decisions that are very specific. But I think, it's embrace it. We need to get on board with it. We need to be in the right place with data because this is really giving learning a seat at the table. It's kind of elevated them because now all of a sudden talent strategies aren't, we're guessing at something. The world we live in is moving so quickly. The talent strategies are now about, keeping companies relevant, and learning analytics, I think, gives learning the edge in that discussion.
Great thought, Brandon.
I think it would kind of spin off of that, and the mantra being is start now, because it's hard to know where we're going if we don't know where we've been, right? So let's have our baseline through collecting this data now, and then let's kind of pave that way through those feedback loops, through the iterative fashion, pulling buttons or pulling levers, pushing buttons to kind of shape where we want to go.
Okay, and if our listeners would like to know more about learning analytics, Brandon, where can they contact or find you?
So probably easiest would be on LinkedIn, right? Because then you don't have to remember my email address, but we can kind of have that in the show notes, my email address. But LinkedIn would probably be the best.
Okay, great. And then I'm assuming, James, they'll find you at the dog park.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be at the dog park in a minute with him, trying to like burn some of his energy off the puppy. But I think as Brandon said, the best one is probably LinkedIn. My email address and things are on LinkedIn, so that'll be the easiest place to find them. We can certainly put them in the show notes as well.
Very cool. Well, I have to say this has been a lot of fun. You two have been excellent dance partners. I've appreciated the time, and on behalf of our global listening audience, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been really good fun.
Thank you for taking the lead, Michael.
The Performance Matters podcast is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can subscribe to the show anywhere you get podcasts or listen on our website at gpstrategies.com.